In Sameolji's video response to my video response to Lord Strange's video about cheating to win, he talked about being interested in the idea of framing roles, and he asked us about how and when and why we might do this. So this is a short, I hope, video response about framing roles. So let's see. First off, Sameolji mentioned the golden rule, sometimes known as Rule 0. If you don't like a rule, you can change it. Now, I've got previous clips out there that actually claim that genre is Rule 0, bumping Rule 0 up to Rule 1, or down from the golden rule to merely the silver rule, I guess. Anyway, yes. If you don't like a rule, change it. I don't know that I've ever met anyone that applied it to roles. If you don't like a role, change it. But definitely if a rule or a situation is not working out in a way that helps the game, then the game master is empowered by this rule to change it. Now, what Lord Strange is proposing, Lord Strange is John Wick, game designer. His work has appeared in so many places. His own games, Legend of the Five Rings, Houses of the Blooded, 7th Sea, too many games to imagine. John Wick clearly likes rolling dice, and he likes making games that have interesting dice mechanics. But then you get into story game style development, where you're not just role-playing and seeing what happens. You're role-playing and trying to produce a particular feeling of story or a particular style of story in a very set genre, and the rules are designed around reinforcing all of this. And there, the dice can give you results which may not fit with your expectations of that story, and therefore you're put in the position where you have to fudge or cheat, or, like Wick is doing in his recent Play Dirty clip, create a way to both satisfy the mechanics and roll dice, but allow for a reasonable and controllable amount of what he calls cheating. So, does this make sense? I came out in my clip and said, no, it doesn't make sense. But I usually don't run that type of game. And when I do, it leads us to the concept of framing roles. Understanding who the characters are and what they can reasonably do. And when a role is called for, it has an objective and it has very clearly defined parameters. That's what I mean when I say framing roles, is that it's not, I kill him, or it's not, I trick him. Right? It's not the result. It's not the result. We don't frame roles based on the result that the character and the player, and possibly the game master, wants. We frame roles based on the intention. What action is being undertaken to achieve that result? In other types of gaming, especially in the type of story-based gaming that John Wick, Lord Strange, is talking about in his clip, even there, it's not the result that we're rolling for. It's the next step toward the type of story we're trying to tell, right? How do we get from this scene to the next scene? And again, it's the intention. Okay, so what I meant in my clip specifically about framing is setting up the conditions for the role so that they are clear to everyone at the table why the role is being attempted, that it is an attempt. It's not a foregone conclusion. You're not just rolling for degrees of success. You're rolling for the possibility of failure and success. Beyond that, there may be degrees of success or degrees of failure. That everyone understands that. and that everyone understands what the actual outcome of that roll is. At a very basic level, framing roles includes things like the game master being aware of the number of actions a character can perform in a round, and in games like A Time of War, Mech Warrior, or Shadowrun, there are types of actions, right? A complete action, or a complex action, or a simple action, or a free action, or these things. Being able to track that, framing roles is an aspect of that, and the extension is just being aware of what's coming next. It's also essential to know when not to roll, like in a World of Darkness game, right? In the old World of Darkness, they had 5 dots, right? So the first dot in a skill was being a novice, you were new to the skill. Second dots, you were practice, so this is at the point where you could, drive reliably or whatnot. 3 dots, you were considered a professional. 4 dots, you were getting exceptional, and 5 dots, you were world class. Okay, so from 1 to 5 range. A lot of unnecessary rolls take place in games like this because people are not willing to move forward with what the rules are actually telling you about this, right? The same goes in games like Call of Cthulhu, based on basic role-playing, where a 60% or a 75% or an 85% represents a certain level of professionalism with a skill. And that level of professionalism means that when you're in a situation that is normal for that skill, you do not roll. Knowing when not to roll is as, if not more important than knowing when and how to roll. So, we could have one discrete action, we could have a period of time with a number of related and relevant actions within that period of time, or we can have a stated objective with one roll to determine yes or no. Now, typically, that last one is in games where the zoom level is way out, such as you are telling a science fiction story with a series of interplanetary invasions, right? It would take far too long to play out every battle, so you focus on the important battles, but a lot of the battles where there are no player characters involved and they are, minor military forces, this is abstracted to the point where 1 or 2 rolls can take care of the entire battle, where you might play a battle that the PCs are in for 2, 3, 4 sessions. So, depending on the level of abstraction, depending on the level of importance of that particular action to the system you're playing, determines, first of all, how much information is covered by the roll. So the typical combat in the typical role-playing game is usually a period of time and an amount of damage. So, in Dungeons and Dragons, you might get a certain number of attacks per round, or in Playdom Fantasy, you might get a certain number of attacks per round, or in Pendragon, you might have a certain intention for a combat round, and then we roll as the game dictates to determine what the outcomes are. Do you hit? Do you miss? If you hit, how much damage is done? Some games, like RuneQuest, each action gets a distinct roll, right? So I roll to hit, and that's one swing of the sword or one swing of the weapon at the enemy. I roll to parry. That's one action to parry that one specific attack. That's a very granular level of detail. Framing the rolls in any of these cases requires that everybody knows why we're rolling. Everybody knows that there's a possibility of success or failure, what degree of success is possible, what degree of failure is possible, and everybody understands what that actual outcome can be. As we've said before, rolling is an important part of building tension. And so if we're going to not ask for a roll because the players character is clearly so competent in that area that a roll is a waste of time, then that needs to be a reward. That needs to build the player up in some way. Right? It can't be just, nah, don't bother to roll. You're good enough. Right? Describe. Connect the character and the player together. Help them immerse into what it's like to be someone for whom this particular skill comes easily now. Right? So we're not talking about, you don't need to roll for open heart surgery. Right? And if we are talking about that, well then, you damn well better make sure that the player walks out of there knowing that their character was awesome today. What we are talking about is understanding why we're rolling, understanding what the purpose is, what the outcome is, what the ramifications and consequences are for all of the outcomes, and then deciding what to ask for or if to ask for a roll at all. And if you are running a story-based game, then you're in service to the story. So the dice results can be set up to take you in the direction that you want to go. Right? They don't have to ever be put in a position where you're, adverse to them, where you are at odds with them, where the results that they might give mean that you have to ignore them. Right? If that happens, you've asked for the wrong roll. In a game where players are free to act and the story is determined by those actions, then the dice rolls there need to demonstrate results, period. Not story outcomes. And they're not there to determine, if we're going to move on to the next scene or not. They're there to determine if something where there is doubt about success, whether or not it happens. They're there to determine exactly what happens in that finite moment that we're rolling for. Do they succeed with their bribery attempt or not? Do they forge their signature correctly or not? Do they hit or not? Do they woo or not? That's all the rolls are for. So framing them so that they actually address the action that's being undertaken and not the dream result that the player might have or the story result that the game master might hope that things swing toward. It's not connected. Just the action.